like I said, I learned a lot, and I've realized the importance of education and how much of an influence and effect a person or entity can have on any student throughout their whole entire life of education. So, a little bit about me. Adam talked about that I'm a research engineer and I work at Dakota State University, but I'm from Cartersville, Georgia. So if you hear a little bit of a southern twang, I'm sorry, but you're just gonna have to deal with it. Yeah, and I grew up in public school until I was 16, then moved to a private Christian school for my junior and senior years. After I graduated, I went to Dakota State, got my bachelor's in cyber operations, master's in computer science. I'm an adjunct instructor as well as the research engineer doing a bunch of computer stuff that, I'm definitely a nerd about. I love messing with computers. It's a lot of fun, but I also love to teach all that stuff. And realistically, a lot of my computer background now led me to learning about Bitcoin a lot more. So over my time and upbringing within the American education system, I can tell you for certain that I have a lot of strong feelings against it, and yet I teach in it. And I want it to be great, but the design of how it currently stands, in my opinion, is both lacking and restraining. So I'm going to break down this presentation in basically 6 topics: the importance of education, the American education system, problems with public education, private and homeschooling as a solution, how does Bitcoin help, and then Bitcoin education to end it. So the first half of the presentation, I'm not really going to be focusing on Bitcoin, but we'll get there. So let's talk about the importance of education. Why is education important for everybody? Hopefully all of you here today, you understand that education is very important, because why else would you be here, right, if you're not trying to learn something new today? Recently, I read a book titled Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order by Ray Dalio. You may have heard of this book, and if you haven't, I think it's personally a great read. And he labels 8 important strengths a nation needs to succeed. He orders these chronologically, starting with the base layer: education, then innovation, competitiveness, output, trade, military, financial center, and reserve status to end it. It's an interesting highlight of the book that I hadn't never really thought of before, with education being at that base layer. But to understand that the basis of building a moral and productive society, it really does start with good, moral, and honest education. Education leads to innovation from creators and thinkers, which allows for more competitiveness as a society. This produces greater economic output, creating routes for trade, both nationally or internationally. You then need to protect this trade as goods travel out to other countries with a military. You enable the society to become a financial center of the world. And then finally, if you grow enough, in power as a nation state, you then have the capability of having your currency as the reserve status, right? So he goes on to describe many other interesting topics, some that I definitely agree and disagree with, but the book is what really started my studies into education being a core foundational aspect to advancing and building a society, not from a global power point of view, but more so how we can push forward for the good of all humanity. So this brought me to studying the American education system. The history of it is pretty interesting. I never really realized that a lot of public schooling was built around creating factory workers during the times of the Industrial Revolution in the 1700s, 1800s. This is one large reason that, we have the strict schedules we do. The whole 8 to 4, 9 to 5 type schedule is kind of mapped around this idea. The system was designed not to produce innovators or critical thinkers, but rather machines that are good at being told what to do. As time went on, we adopted a lot of the same practices in the early 1900s, and honestly, it hasn't changed that much. I'll tell you what I've personally seen, and I think it's very sad with a lot of my students that I do teach, but and just people that I know personally that are my age, there are so many students out there that go on to college with no idea what the heck they want to do, what they want to major in. They take on this massive amount of debt very cheaply. It's very easy to get a loan. They waste their time and energy living it up, like at parties or just not worrying about their education, not taking it seriously. End up eventually graduating, getting some job, working 40 to 60-hour work weeks, giving them little to no time with no motivation to continue educating themselves. It's pretty dull, I mean, in my opinion, when you think about it, because as time goes on, economic conditions worsen. As we know, the US dollar is falling in purchasing power as the clock ticks. And honestly, the wages will stay stagnant and don't keep up with inflation, or you have some midlife crisis and end up switching careers and panicking what the heck you want to do with the rest of your life. I'm not saying this happens to every student, though. I mean, I can look at tons of people that I graduated with, my own coworkers, myself included, and I would say that we're innovators. But as time has gone on, especially in the past decade, there seems to be less of that being produced. And I see that in my own students. When I came into the school, or when I came to college here at Dakota State University in 2017, the environment, honestly, was pretty lively. I enjoyed it, I loved it, and there was a lot of engagement. But now, flipping that post-COVID, it's completely changed. The entire classroom environment has just died, basically. And it's really sad to see that, because I want drive out of my students, but they're just sitting there like robots, basically. And it sucks. But yeah, the reason I think we can definitely see that data shows that we have less of that being produced in America is you can look at a lot of high-paying, rising in demand jobs, such as the computer field especially, and they are not filled by the majority of Americans. They're filled by international people. So there's this organization called the OECD. It's a government organization that measures education standards across the world. And I'm going to use this standard to basically compare the United States with the rest of the world in terms of education. The scores are measured in 3 categories, reading, mathematics, and science, and I'll take you through those charts in a second. But the test conducted for this is called the PISA test, P-I-S-A. I don't really care what it stands for, but this test is taken every 3 years internationally by sophomores ranging 15 to 16 years old. A few things that concern me with this test, though, is mainly the sample size, and I don't specifically know how students are chosen, which I find a big problem. There are roughly around 4 million to 5 million sophomores in the United States every year, yet this test takes a pool of 5,000 students or less out of that whole entire 5 million, right? And the United States, almost in every single year, struggles to actually keep up with the participation rate compared to the rest of the world. Like, I know countries, I was looking the other day, I think Poland, they have about 200 to 250,000 sophomores, yet they have quadruple the amount of students participating in this survey. And so the numbers, I don't think, fully accurately display what the education is compared in the United States, but I think the data itself goes to show, anyway, how we do compare. So, getting into reading scores, I charted this out, and it was stupidly annoying to go through this data, but I have it labeled the United States scores over the course of 2009 to 2018. 2021 didn't happen yet because COVID, they postponed it. The average score of the world is in the middle, and then the rank of the United States in scores is at the bottom. Okay, so for reading at least, we do score generally above average, and I would say that's a good thing, but you can see compared to ranking and in the world, we don't do the greatest. And the reason I have a star next to 2018 as well is due to the fact the OECD said the United States did not actually meet any participation requirement for the percentage needed in the pool they sampled from. So I would say 2018 scores are not particularly accurate. I would go more based on 2015. But yeah, I mean, 10th, 24th, and 13th. We are pretty much right in the middle in terms of those scores out of, I think, there's 70 OECD countries that are measured. In mathematics, we rank well below average. It's kind of sad to see this, but generally, I mean, the scores speak for themselves. We got 487, 481, 470, 478, and yeah, it's all below average of the score for the world, and our ranks really suck. We are not great at math, apparently. Then in science, the last category that's measured is somewhat just in the middle, right at average, and yeah, we still don't rank very well. And so this led me to, when I was looking up all this data, this is what really forced me to learn about just public education in general and how the system works, but leading to the problems that I have with public education. So I believe a great analogy to public education is thinking, would you want to shop at a government-owned supermarket? Probably not, right? A prime example of this, and it's true, this happens in Venezuela. They have government-owned supermarkets with price-controlled food, and it may sound nice because the products are definitely cheaper. However, the food is bought up instantly. The store is only open for 2 days of the week. There are food shortages when the government can't provide. And finally, there's a bunch of thieves that steal the food right outside of the stores, just waiting for someone unprotected to walk by. And it's honestly a nightmare. Public education, being a government-owned system, has many problems, and we're going to address some of those key problems now. Probably the largest issue, I believe, with public education is government funding. Over 90% of funding for public education comes from the state or local government, and the other 10% is pretty much federal. In order for public and even private education to work, the money needs to be there. Doesn't matter where the money comes from, it needs it, right? It's proven across the board that the more money there is invested in a student, the more likely they are to be well educated. This is a large reason why a lot of private schooled students do tend to score higher academically than public schooled students. It costs a lot more to go to private school, and what amazes me, this blew my mind. What amazes me is to look at funding in the past decade and see that only 4 states in the United States of America have increased their efforts to fund public education. 4 states. South Dakota is not one of them, but we are at -1% since 2008. So we're right at that break even. And it was really sad to me to see the data of states like Arizona, I'm pretty sure, where they've decreased their funding in public education by around 40%, which is terrible. So the largest reason due to this since 2008, well, if you lived through that time, the Great Recession happened. Many states cut spending and made tax cuts to balance their budgets due to deficits, leading to less funding. This, coupled with inflation and a slow recovery from the recession, it led to a cumulative net loss of over $600 billion. And this is data based off of 2018. I have no idea what post-COVID data looks like because nothing's out there for it. So one of the largest consequences from this is, in decreased funding, is a decrease in teacher quality, retention, and salaries. So teachers are another problem in some regard, and I'm going to split this up into 2 categories. We'll start with good teachers. Some of the most influential people in my life, no doubt, are teachers. I'm super thankful that I've had amazing teachers throughout my life and continue to have amazing teachers as I continue to learn. I believe the greatest teachers are guides and mentors rather than lecturers, right? they truly make the money you pay worth it. And this is the path that I've tried to take as an instructor now, as I feel it's to the benefit of the student and I truly care for them to learn the content, not give them some grade letter that doesn't mean anything. Number one problem for good teachers, I believe, is salary. For the amount of work and skill that I've seen, my own teachers working in the state, you can see everybody's salaries on the state system in South Dakota at least. People deserve to be paid more for what they know. And it's really sad to me because unfortunately at Dakota State right now, we are losing some faculty that I think are really great because they're going to be paid somewhere elsewhere a lot more for less work. So I believe this is a major concern. Teaching is also, at least for a lot of teachers, is more than a 40-hour work week as well. And that's kind of the sad reality of the American dream, that people do become overworked over time, and as the US dollar diminishes in purchasing power, it can become a trap of never being able to self-improve or continue your own education in any area, right? If you're constantly working or whatever, you have little amount of time to help your own education. So this can wither some of the greatest teachers, and I've seen it, by burnout causing them to quit or taking jobs elsewhere with higher pay, which makes your own school look worse in the long term, because you definitely need good teachers to have a good school. Now, bad teachers, we've probably all had a bad teacher in our life, and if you haven't, you are lucky. But if you've had a very bad teacher, you can probably agree they shouldn't be teaching anymore, or this is not your profession that you should be in. That can be from any area too. It doesn't have to be just in school. This can be like a boss or something. In public education, a major problem I've seen is how ridiculously hard it is to remove bad teachers. Of course, I'm not talking about a teacher that did some outlandish crime, because obviously they should be fired, but rather teachers that receive a lot of terrible feedback from students, and there comes this problem called tenure. And believe me, I do believe in job security, don't get me wrong. However, when a teacher achieves tenure status, I do think there is some cause and effect relationship that the teacher can become less pressured to do well or put forth the effort in teaching content, right? So they become more laxed. This argument is not necessarily the strongest, but what I do believe to be more concerning is the fact that I personally can make complaints, meet with administrative staff, and clearly rate my professor poorly on public websites, yet they're still teaching, and nothing ever happens. And what is nice, at least at the college level, is you do have somewhat of a choice who you can take a class with for certain classes, but talk about any public education outside of that, you have literally no choice, right? I didn't get to choose my teachers growing up in public school, and honestly, it sucked at times because I had some terrible teachers, but I did have some great ones. This is probably one of the large problems that I have personally with public education, is just the fact that you don't have basically any choice, ever. So to wrap up teachers, there needs to be more accountability on the content being taught within any school at any level. This was my most annoying aspect of being a student growing up, and I'm gonna rat on Dakota State here. Hopefully this doesn't get me fired, but I just want to be completely honest, right? When I was a student, there were definitely some classes I took that were completely worthless. I learned nothing, never understood any of the content, and yet I came out with a 4.0 in the class. I wasn't alone either. There's plenty of other students that have this as well. And I believe that this was the downfall of the professors not being accountable, or administrative staff not being accountable for professors. And I will say, bravo on Dakota State at least, is that some of the teachers that I believed probably should be gone are going to be gone this year. So I'm happy about that. Now, this kind of just makes me look worse, though, right? I graduated with a 4.0 in my master's degree. But if I'm admitting that I learned nothing in some of the classes that I took, it just makes me look worse, right? And this is what I like to call grade inflation. And this happens across all colleges in the United States, high school, elementary school. And I especially know it's true because I know my brother, and my brother got away with a lot of things and yet still didn't really learn a lot, but he still came out with a 4.0 in some of his classes. And then the other side of grade inflation that's interesting is something like I graduated with a 4.2 GPA in high school. Like, what does that even mean? How is that fair to anyone in any other high school that doesn't have these AP classes that offer you a 5.0 grade average when you make an A? How is it fair for other job seekers who made like a 3.6 GPA that went to a very credible school, that have worked incredibly hard and maybe have more skill than, say, myself, right? But I may be the one hired because I have a better GPA. And luckily, we do have interview processes that can vet people, but I believe accountability in this regard is entirely important. And parents, I'm not counting you out either. I'm speaking from a personal experience as a son of two great parents, and it's important that your parents need to be involved either directly or indirectly with your child's education. Teachers can't always give the individual attention your child may need at times, which is unfortunate, but you should also be concerned with the quality of the education your child is receiving, because it can be truly detrimental later in life that if the quality they received for education, or they don't even know how to learn for themselves, it can be entirely detrimental. I understand not all parents also can really take that time out of their work days, especially low-income families, working day and night, but get somebody that can at least give them that attention to help them. It's very important. Then, centralized education. I love this one. The reason I brought up the OECD scores earlier in accordance to the years 2009 through 2018 is because of the implementation of Common Core standards. You may have heard of this, especially if you had a child go through this curriculum introduced in 2009. The standard was proposed as an enlightenment for education in the United States due to fear that we were falling behind other nations in education scores, which is true. We were, and we still are. It was accepted by around 45 states, including South Dakota, and it's still in South Dakota. It was not proposed at the federal level, but it became a part of the Obama administration's agenda to push forward by giving states money if they accepted the proposal. And a lot of states were pretty desperate at that point after the Great Recession, so they didn't have a lot of resistance to this standard of education. And another interesting endorsement is Bill Gates endorsed this whole entire Common Core standard. And you can have your opinion on Bill Gates, but I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to get into the failure that Common Core is, but understand that a centralized system of education on any level, in my true opinion, cannot work at all. This is logical to me for many reasons. Just good teachers know their students the best, right? Ask any teacher that truly cares for their students, and hopefully they agree. But when you introduce a strict curriculum and expectations without a teacher's creative input, you're just given this content and say, teach it. You are going to run into so many problems that not only confuse and hinder the students, but even yourself as a teacher. Not all students learn the same, and if you have children, you can definitely understand that. Or if you're a teacher, you understand that. And some students will understand concepts and topics a lot quicker than others. Doesn't mean that the ones that are slower are any less intelligent. They just may have skills and interests in other areas that are suitable for them. And the next topic, the last one, is test and homework driven versus passion and skill driven. So in the United States, we are much more the top one. But maybe we can learn something from better educated countries about tests. For an example, Finland, who ranks 3rd best education system in the world and 8th best educated country, has 1 mandatory test when they're 16 years old. That's it. The children don't even start school until they're 7. Every teacher must hold a master's degree and are held accountable by administrative staff for the content taught. There's 20-hour school weeks. Every hour is divided into 45 minutes of working and then 15 minutes of break doing whatever you want. And their education is passion and skill driven. They do a lot of projects and skill development, and the list goes on and on for positives. That was not always how it was, though, in Finland. This changed roughly 50 years ago, and because the government had recognized that they need to truly change how they go about their education. And now, the product of that is that they are the 3rd best in the world. They used to be 1st. They have gone down a little bit compared to China and Singapore, but it still shows a good product of that. So, personally, I despise letter grade systems and exams, honestly. It puts an excessive amount of pressure and stress on students, driving them to not fall in love with the material that's taught, but instead cram for an exam based on short-term memory. At the same time, teachers may not focus on getting the content across because they're so focused on making a test. From personal experience, there were classes I personally just dreaded in school. So I would figure out any way possible to get around learning the content to just get an A. And I was definitely good at it, I won't lie. I believe that to be inherently wrong for how a student should learn. So for my classes personally that I teach now, I don't give tests and I rarely give homework. And when I do give homework, I base it on kind of an easy assignment that just gauges if the student has learned the content or not. And this has been really productive in my classes. I've gotten a lot of great feedback, and personally, my students really like me for that. But teachers should promote a desire for students to learn and love the content. Then you'll see the skill and passion come into fruition. And this goes for things like the ACT and SAT as well. I would like to think of myself as pretty smart or intelligent, seeing I was a straight A student, always paid attention in school and liked content for the most part. And I say that humbly, I'm not bragging or anything. However, when I took the ACT for the first time, it told me otherwise. First time I took the ACT, I made a 21, which was below the average of a 22 in Georgia. Yet, I wanted to go to schools like the Naval Academy or Georgia Tech at that time that required at least a 30 to be even competitive on the ACT. And let me just tell you how broken this test is. The fact I took a 4-week prep class, which was basically a cheat code for how to take the test, gave me a 32 the next time I took it. My score bumped up 11 points, and that to me right there just proves that this test is not a valid indicator of how intelligent a student is. But, you know, sorry to the other students that can't afford prep classes. I guess you're out of luck. It's ridiculous to me. So, solutions. Those were definitely not all the problems that we have in our system. There's plenty more. But some major ones that I feel concerned about. So what are the possible solutions to the broken system of public education we have here in the United States? And honestly, I think private and homeschooling is the route to go. I do believe that when you mix education with a free market, you will produce better quality schooling overall. Whether this be through private or homeschooling, I believe this to be the main solution that we have now, because you are decentralizing the education system as a whole. There's a lot more competitiveness to private schooling where funding will go to the better schools. As funding moves away from failing private schools, right, in a free market, well, they go out of business. This isn't a government, there isn't a government to bail them out, or at least there shouldn't be, and that is the reality. So homeschooling is somewhat in the same regard. It's just, you know, the teacher will lose their job. Within private or homeschooling, an organization is also able to promote core values you deem best fit for your child. For an example, myself being a Christian, I would like my child to have some sense of a moral education along with biblical ideas incorporated into their education. I know that not every student in a private Christian school is going to be a Christian. I mean, I went to one, I know. That's just a fact, but being able to have the choice of discerning and examining the values within any school should be sought after. We should be teaching education from a moral foundation. This isn't a new idea either. This was said by Aristotle 1,000 years ago within his own theory of moral education. Within public schooling, you don't have this basis or choice of what your student even gets to learn. The priorities are determined by the bureaucrats and government overhead. Last thing with private and homeschooling is that they are still susceptible to the issues of how to carry out the education, and there's still accountability issues. But if you have the freedom and choice to arrange those aspects more easily in these types of schoolings, you're going to get a better result. So now on to Bitcoin. How the heck does Bitcoin even help any of this? Well, I always loved Bitcoin mechanics said this. Bitcoin is a mirror of truth for the fallacies in the corrupt financial system we see today. Bitcoin reshapes how you think about the long term, and we call this, in the Bitcoin community, low time preference. When you have a money that isn't withering away over time and assuming you have full custody of your Bitcoin, you begin to think a lot harder about the decisions you make with money. You can think about taxes, for an example, and thank you, South Dakota, that you don't have state tax, but you will begin to take a stronger stance against some of the policies and taxing that make no sense to you, because you know the money taken away from you is going to be more valuable over time, versus now any money you make with the US dollar, we think of it so cheaply that we just want to get rid of it, right? I mean, personally, I never have really held money in a bank account and just let it sit there. As I didn't know about Bitcoin before, I 100% invested it because I tried to grow it and beat inflation. So this concept of a low time preference to me is beautiful, and it applies to every area of life. You begin to think hard about what you were investing your time and money into instead of wasting it. I believe the quality of education would shift positively if everyone was thinking in a low time preference. You think about what you were learning, like how does this help me in the long term? Why does each student need to learn XYZ? Does this apply to any life skills? The outcome of this is that we truly produce critical thinkers and not machines. Students will adapt to an ability to learn for themselves as well and value what they're passionate about. The next thing Bitcoin helps is the concept of Austrian economics. Now, this is a huge topic to break down. There's no way I could explain it in like 2 minutes. But I bring it up because I think of what teachers, parents, and even students can learn from Bitcoin and its following of Austrian economics. You have a hope of a true savings account while your money appreciates in value over time. Our current form of economics, which tilts towards what's called Keynesian economics, teaches you to spend and take on debt rather than save. And we can see this pretty prevalently within our world of consumerism on steroids. This Keynesian practice causes you to think about everything in what Adam called earlier, the short term. Everybody just doesn't think about the long term, ever. And rather, if you hold on to this Austrian idea of long-term thinking and deflation, it gives you more purchasing power over time. And you get into this mindset of like, yeah, I can finally save, and I don't need to go spend this money on something. That's such a powerful thing from a consumer's point of view. And money really does have an impact on tons of areas of your life that you may not even think about. And the last thing I think about Bitcoin is freedom. I absolutely love the panel on this in Miami, and if you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend watching this. But ever since I've been in Bitcoin, I have not had one bit of worry about my personal finances because I've come to understand what Bitcoin is. I've evaluated how much Bitcoin I already own and saved, and personally, it's so freeing. Like, I go to bed, sleep it sound at night, just knowing, yeah, like, I don't care about the price and what it's doing, and I just keep stacking sats over time. And this comfortability has given me this idea of being more generous as well with my money. I think frugality can be found a lot in Bitcoin because, of course, everybody just wants to stack as much as they can while they can at such low prices. But I don't want that to become too, I don't want to become too frugal. And yeah, I definitely love to give. And it's an amazing thing when you have this ability of financial freedom. This is not financial advice, but personally, by the end of each month, almost 100% of my wealth is in Bitcoin, and I have $0 in my bank account. I save what I need to in Bitcoin, I pay my bills, and I give away the rest. It's kind of a crazy idea when you think about it. My financial advisor completely hates that idea. And just why are you not diversifying? And it is a crazy idea when you think of Bitcoin as an investment. Earlier, Alex was saying, Bitcoin is not an investment, and in his opinion, and in my opinion as well. It's honestly the best form of money to exist since the beginning of time. And I say that not only because I understand it from a technical and economical point of view, but even in my own Christianity, a biblical point of view, it holds true. And morally speaking, I don't want to partake in the corrupt system built by the Federal Reserve anymore. Until I see a world on Bitcoin, I'm not going to invest my Bitcoin into anything because it's just not the right time. Finally, how can we push forward in Bitcoin education? Believe me, learning about Bitcoin is not the easiest venture at all. It takes hours. I am incredibly thankful, too, for all of those who are already taking this initiative in the space, like the speakers here today, websites created full of content, people authoring and publishing books, and creators on YouTube. The amount of time and effort that so many have put in already is tremendous, and I can't overlook that. But the one area I see that is incredibly lacking is within education systems. There are roughly 20 universities in the United States today that offer blockchain and cryptocurrency courses, while only about 4 of them specifically go in depth on Bitcoin. So yeah, then you think about high school education, elementary, primary, there's probably barely anything. And then let alone in the whole United States system, it's never required to learn about financial literacy or anything. It's an elective, but it's probably not going to talk about Bitcoin. So this is the area of education I want to focus in and help progress, concatenating all of the information I've learned and continue to learn into a class that gives direction and guidance to those who don't understand what this technology is that we're dealing with. I'm tired of shilling and lies of a lot of other cryptocurrency projects or blockchain projects and just misunderstanding what Bitcoin really is. Many of us probably recently, we talked about this, the failure of Luna and Terra in the news, leading to many losing their life savings, failed business ventures, and who knows, maybe the claim that there were people taking their lives from this is true, and to me that is just absolutely terrible. No person, I don't care how much you love Bitcoin at all, there's definitely nobody that should be taking their lives due to something like this. And Adam was talking about the toxicity in the Bitcoin environment sometimes, and there's a lot of people from this Luna thing that have actually become Bitcoiners, and you got to welcome them with open arms. Sometimes it takes a humbling to get into Bitcoin. But yeah, this is what I want to help fix, bringing forth the truth in education. So with that, I have 2 announcements. First announcement is I will be partnering with the University of South Dakota and their Austrian Lifelong Learning Institute to teach a 4-week class over Bitcoin in October. I want to teach this class, I wish I could teach this class a lot longer. However, I'm not going to be able to because they said their classes usually only go 4 weeks. But basically what the OLLI is, such a hard acronym to say, it's a program meant for anyone to just sign up as a membership and then take classes for free. So it's very lax. There's no test, there's no homework, just people wanting to learn more about interesting topics. And like I said, I have 4 weeks, and I'm going to try to cover a lot of content, but the main idea I want to get across is understanding what Bitcoin is at the simplest level, and then arguing the moral case for Bitcoin. And all I can get the students to do is to think. Now, the bigger announcement is we will be teaching Bitcoin education at Dakota State in 2023. And I'm super excited for that. Personally, I will be teaching this along with 2 other professors at the college. This class will be a 3-credit class within a semester, so over 4 months. And this course is going to offer 3 different perspectives. The technical perspective, which I'm going to focus in, an economics perspective, and a business perspective. The goal of the class is not to produce Bitcoin maximalists at all, but rather to produce critical thinkers who will continue this journey into understanding Bitcoin in their own time. Because, I mean, you can't teach all the content there is to know in Bitcoin in 4 months at all. Yeah, so we're going to be covering a lot of things just over Bitcoin and talking about the history of why this stuff even came to be and other projects as well. But I'm going to be teaching more so in the other project areas why I don't see them fit as technologies. I mean, some of them maybe could work, but not as money. And the decentralization aspect of Bitcoin is the main thing we need to get across. We plan this class to be just totally relaxed as well and engaging. I'm not here to burden students with homework or tests because I want them to understand this content. And I'll be teaching as well the moral case for Bitcoin, and the textbook, which I think should be a required read for everybody in the world, is going to be the Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean. And that's on the table back there if you haven't read it. So the next steps, I don't want to stop just at the university level. I want to help teachers and educators alike take their own steps into teaching Bitcoin and financial literacy within their own schools from primary to college education. I believe every person in the world should have financial literacy and understand what money is, because if we do, we can fix a lot of problems, and it all starts with education. So with that, my name is Bailey Bellisario. You can check me out at my website, zomix.tech, and my Twitter handle is bbellisario20. Thanks, y'all. Appreciate it.